Hello, I'm Mia. I'm 29 years old and I just got divorced from my husband, Fred, a couple of months ago. I had met Fred in college. We shared a couple of classes and we would always end up sitting next to each other. We began talking to each other and before we knew it, we were falling for each other. While we had a great relationship, there was one problem, and that was Fred's mother, Holly. For some reason, she hated me and she constantly tried to break Fred and me up. I would talk to Fred about the discomfort she made me feel, but he would never really do anything about it. He hated having to go against his mother, especially because he had only her when growing up. I eventually just let it go and dealt with her crappy behavior towards me. She would love to criticize everything I did, and sometimes she would criticize things about me that she didn't even know. I figured then that Fred would tell her these things, and that only made me more upset. We fought a lot over that, and Fred finally relented and stopped telling her things about me. We dated for about 3 years before getting married. Holly realized that her words were no longer affecting me, so she began trying to influence Fred to divorce me. That never worked, and we went in low contact with her for a little while. During that time, both of us got promotions at work. However, I was earning a little more than Fred, so we split our expenses 60-40, with me paying the highest portion. We were happy as a couple, but as an individual, I began to feel like I wasn't doing enough. I needed to pick up a hobby. I had always been rather good with design, be it interior or otherwise, but if I needed to do something on the side, I figured I needed it to be something I could work on from the comfort of my home. Graphic design was the first thing that I thought of. I decided to try my hand at it, and it turned out I was pretty good. I took a couple of courses and bought some equipment without Fred knowing because I wanted to keep my project a secret. I didn't like spilling the beans on my projects because I often had many of them, but not all of them always worked out. The only person I told about my new venture in graphic design was my best friend, Jess. So I've taken up an interest in something. Oh, is this another one of your many hobbies that you'll lose interest in pretty fast? Hopefully not. I hope to get paid really well through it. You're going to get paid through it? Finally, don't hold back, spill. Well, you know how I have an eye for design and art. Don't tell me you're planning on painting. No, that's way too tiring, but I've begun graphic designing. That's a wonderful idea. That's actually a very profitable field. Yeah, I took a couple of courses and I want to start working. You know what? I might be able to start a business. Whoa, I don't know about starting it by myself. I was thinking more of working with a firm. No, that's boring and not very different from what you're doing. You'll lose interest pretty fast, but I have a couple of friends who also are starting businesses of their own. I could introduce you to them, and you could help them design their logos and websites. That would be amazing. The people that Jess introduced me to happened to be these rich people who had no problem throwing away money on a risk, as in I had no other qualifications and I was very much a beginner. But they liked my work a lot and they introduced me to many other businesses and individuals. Slowly but surely, I began to earn a good amount of money through my side gig. It was a great relief because now Fred and I could live a lot easier. I began saving up little by little so I could buy Fred something nice. I hadn't told him, and whenever I wanted to, it felt like he never wanted to talk. I quickly realized that something was up with him, but he never seemed to want to talk about it. The first month I noticed something was off was when Fred told me he had spent all of his money on some investments a week after he got paid. We did get into a little bit of an argument, but we got through that month. I pulled in a couple of extra hours at work and everything was all right. The next month, Fred said the same thing again, and I was beyond upset. How could he have spent so much so quickly? I ended up saying a bunch of mean things, which at that time I had been very apologetic about, but I hoped that maybe that would teach him to be a little more responsible. When it happened again the next month, I was tired. At this point, I had learned to be more cautious, so I worked a little more anyway. Aside from my actual job, my graphic designing side job was also going great, and in fact, that was what was paying the bills more than anything. But when Fred didn't have money again for the third month, I was done with him. How would you let this happen again? Do you literally learn nothing? Look, I'm just trying to get as much return as I can, and I'm messing up a little. It's not a little when you're investing and losing your entire pay. You have your money, right? We'll just do what we've been doing for so long. No, I'm tired of this. I will not support you this month. You figure out your own expenses. What? You can't do that. Well, you can't gamble away all your pay either, but here we are. So what? I'm just supposed to starve and take public transport? There will be food at home because I'll ensure that all our shared expenses are covered. You have to take public transport because you can't pay for your own gas. So you want me to actually look poor? Taking public transport is in no way a reflection of your status. Stop being entitled. If you wanted to drive your own car, you should have thought twice about gambling away all your money. You're a selfish and ruthless person. How could you do this to your husband? What about what you're doing to me? I've been working extra hours just to cover up your losses. Can't you at least try to see my perspective? No, you have no perspective for me to try and look through. Ugh, I'm leaving. I don't want to deal with you right now. Fred left to go to God knows where after that. I couldn't wrap my head around why he was behaving that way. That was a first. I had this nagging feeling that Holly was involved in what was happening, so I decided to do a little snooping while Fred was away. It didn't take too long to figure out that Fred had been lying to me. I had access to his bank account because he had logged into it on my laptop and had saved the password. He had more than enough money in his account. In fact, when I went through his transactions, I saw that other than the usual amounts of money being debited, there was nothing else. I was very confused at that point. Why had he been withholding his money from me? Why had he been lying? I decided to go through his messages because nothing was making any sense to me. The first person I saw that he had texted was his mom. It was regarding the fight we had before he left. He told her that I had lashed out at him because he refused to give me any money, and Holly told him, "I told you." I knew she was behind his change in behavior. She had always been out to get me, but I didn't think that she realized just what kind of fire she was playing with. I scrolled through the rest of their chats and I found out some things. The first was that Holly had been incessantly texting Fred about me. She had kept pointing out my negative traits, like me being money hungry and only staying with him for his money. That was hilarious because I was the one who had been contributing the most to our household. The second was that she had been getting to Fred. He began to text her about minor things I did that annoyed him. She only enabled and amplified his complaints. That explained why Fred was beginning to withdraw from me. And lastly, they had made a plan to cut me off financially. Fred had been hesitant and against it at first, but over time, as Holly enabled his complaining, he began to give in. He finally decided to do it 2 months ago. He had told Holly that I had picked up extra hours the first month and the month later. He told her about our huge fight where I said some mean things. That was only more fuel to the fire. I was obviously beyond hurt at what I had found out. I didn't know what to do about what I found out, so I decided to go over to my best friend Jess's place. Jess has always been the first person I go to whenever I face any problem, regardless of what time it is. Since I showed up at her place at around 11:30 p.m. unannounced, that obviously raised some alarms for her. She let me in and got me settled in with a glass of wine and asked me what happened. So, what's going on? I just found out some disturbing things and I don't know what to do now. All right, who is this about? Holly and Fred. Uh-oh. What did they do? So, you know how Fred has been gambling away his money on some bogus investments for the last 2 months? Yeah. Which was weird as hell. Did he do it again this month? Yeah, except not really. Huh? What do you mean? Turns out he had his money all this time, but has been refusing to give me any money. Hold on, why? That seems so pointless. You've been running the bigger portions of the household expenses, right? Exactly. That's why what he's been doing has been so confusing. Wait, is his mother involved in this? Of course she is. She's been texting him for a while about all my flaws for a while now, and even managed to convince him to stop supporting me. And she doesn't know about how much you're making? Nope. What about Fred? He should have at least been smart enough to figure out just how you've been contributing so much. Does he really think that your day job is paying all the bills? Apparently. I don't know how to go about dealing with this. It's obvious, isn't it? You cut off all his support, and when he's desolate, you divorce and leave him. Isn't that a little cruel? Mia, he didn't care about that. Why do you care? You know what? You're tired. Maybe you should sleep on it and we can discuss things tomorrow. Jess was right. I was beyond exhausted. The emotions of the day drained me in every sense, and I wanted nothing more than to fall asleep. Thankfully, the next day was a weekend. Jess and I put on one of the many movies we had watched many times and fell asleep to it. The next morning, we decided to take a day off from all our troubles and just stayed in bed and watched a couple of movies and shows. We cooked and ate great food and spent a lot of our time just enjoying each other's company. I won't lie. I had to fight with myself to not think about what had happened, but I knew that I needed to take time away if I wanted to deal with it properly. However, that night, I got a call from Holly. I didn't know if I wanted to pick it up, but when Jess looked over my shoulder and saw who was calling me, she urged me to pick it up. With my heart pounding, I picked up the call. Hello, Holly? You scum! Wow, what did I do? You only want my son's money, don't you? Excuse me? That's why you've decided to cut off all his expenses, isn't it? No, he's been spending away all his money on his stupid investments. There's only so long that I can support his bad decisions, especially when they affect us. Well, that was all a test. A test? I was only trying to prove to Fred that you were only staying with him for his money. And look at you. You proved my point. Don't you think you overstepped a little too much into our relationship? Who are you to tell me what's right and wrong when you're a gold digger? Okay, you know what? I don't want my marriage to fail, so what do you propose I do to make things better? I want you and Fred to split everything 50-50. Everything? Are you sure? Yes, let me see how long you'll last. I will draw up a contract for the both of you, and once you've signed it, you have to stick to it. Well, all right. If Fred agrees to it, we'll do it. I would also like a copy of that contract. Of course. We'll see you on Tuesday. I couldn't believe that this was what my marriage had come to. But at the same time, I was full of anger. How dare she call me a gold digger? And how dare Fred be okay with that? I had done nothing but support everything he did, even if it meant losses for us. Hell, even when he lied to me, I covered for us. When I told Jess about what had happened on the call, she began to smile. She helped me realize just how perfect what Holly had done was. If we split everything evenly, that would mean that our mortgage and other big expenses would have to be split. I knew for a fact that if Fred had to pay for his share of everything, he would have virtually nothing to fall back on. He didn't know about my side hustle because it had started off as a secret. I wanted it to get going properly before I told Fred about it. I also wanted to make enough money to buy Fred something expensive and then surprise him with my new source of income. At that moment, I was just really glad that I actually had something solid to fall back on. Tuesday came by pretty quickly. Jess accompanied me after we were both done with work so she could also see what was happening. When we got back home, Holly and Fred were already there. Fred was on his phone while Holly was sitting next to the lawyer and looking at his laptop, making amends to what I assumed was the contract. Holly looked at me with disinterest while Fred looked anxious when he saw me. He tried to communicate with me with his eyes to get us to go talk in the kitchen, but I ignored him. I walked over to Holly and asked to see the contract. The lawyer moved aside and I got to see what was written. Like I had expected, everything was meant to be split evenly, along with the added rule of not helping the other if one of them is short on money. I agreed to it. We got the contract printed out and I signed it. It didn't take long for Fred to start having problems. Initially, Fred and I didn't talk much to each other because I didn't see why I needed to talk to someone who was so willing to see me suffer. But when you live with someone, talking becomes inevitable. Fred also really tried to get me to talk to him. I didn't really bother to answer him at first, but then I got tired of him constantly trying, so I engaged him in conversation. "Will you please just talk to me? We can't keep going this way." "What do you want me to say to you, Fred?" "I don't know, but I miss us." "Oh, really? Is that why you agreed to sign a contract fully separating our finances?" "Well, I just wanted to see if you were in it for the money." "You know how many problems your mother has caused between us, and you still choose to believe her. Is this really the best solution for you?" "Hey, don't call my mother problematic." "Also, what money do you have that I'll need so much?" "Look, I don't want you to lash out at me, okay? I'm trying to make amends here." "There will be no amends until that contract is gone." "It's only been 2 weeks since we signed it. I have seen no proof that you aren't here for the money." "You are some piece of work, aren't you?" "Look, if you're struggling financially, let me know. I'll help you." "Wouldn't that be against your point? Besides, I don't want to be held responsible for violating the contract." "Why are you being so difficult?" "You made things difficult." "Can we just be civil with each other?" "Sure." I could see Fred struggling to maintain the views that Holly influenced and the ones he had originally held. The Fred I had married would never have done something so drastic that had even the slightest bit of a chance to harm me. But here he was, obeying every word of his mother's, and he would live to regret it. That month, I had dutifully already paid off all our big loans, so when the next month rolled around, Fred was stuck. I had paid off my share of the loans and I was living well. Having to pay only half of it freed up my budget by a lot, and that meant that I was able to finally splurge on myself. Jess and I went out a lot. We went to all these fancy restaurants and drank fancy wines. We went to museums and quaint cafes. Obviously, all of this was getting posted on social media. I invited Fred to join on many occasions, but he always said he couldn't come along because, surprise, surprise, he had no money to. To add to that, my graphic designing side gig was going so well that I had cut down the hours of my day job to focus more on that instead. I was even contemplating quitting it. Obviously, Fred was struggling a lot. I went as far as to divide even our groceries, so whenever I looked at his side of the pantry fridge, it would almost always be almost empty. A part of me did feel bad for him, but I kept reminding myself that he had brought this on himself. Eventually, Holly came over to our place. I had been out with Jess, so I was pretty surprised to see her there. "Oh, hey Holly, what brings you here?" "Don't you try and play innocent right now." "Huh? I know what you've been doing, and I'm going to call the police on you." "Excuse me? What are you talking about?" "You've been stealing from Fred." "Huh? Why would I do something like that?" "Because you're trying to get revenge on him. You don't like that he made you sign that contract. My poor son has been struggling all month while you steal his money and go out to all those fancy places." "First of all, your son has no money to steal. I obviously hate the contract, but let's not forget who actually made us sign it. You forced this on us, and now your son is struggling." "Liar. I'm calling the police right now." "Go ahead. I haven't stolen a cent from your son." "How do you have so much money then?" "Your job doesn't do that much more than Fred's. And from what he's told me, you've cut back more hours." "I have another business on the side, a graphic designing one that I plan to surprise Fred with until you filled his head with garbage." "You started your own business without telling me about it?" "I plan to buy you a car with the money I earned." "How much do you make from it?" "Oh, a lot more than you think." You lied." "I didn't do anything. I was trying to do a good thing and then you ruined it. Since you feel so strongly for your son, maybe you should be the one who supports him. And while we're at this, here." I handed the divorce papers to Fred. I had filed for it right after we signed the contract and had been keeping it with me until the right moment presented itself. Fred stared at me with shock, but I couldn't care less. Holly would have normally been very happy to see those papers, considering that had been what she was vying for all this time. But she looked mad instead now that she knew what this was costing Fred. I told them that I would be moving out in 3 weeks and that I would continue to split the remaining amount for the loans, but that was it. Fred tried to plead with me, but I simply told him that this was what he brought on himself. It's been a couple of months since all of this has happened, and I can happily tell you that I'm out of that toxic relationship. Holly didn't let Fred divorce me without contesting it, but there was nothing for Fred to win, considering we had signed a contract that explicitly separated all of our assets. He only ended up losing more money. Since he couldn't keep up with all the mortgage expenses on the house, we sold it, and he moved back in with his mother. My life has only taken a positive turn. My business has been booming, and I have gotten to work with a lot of big brands. It has been a blissful and amazing time for me. I'm just grateful that I had something to fall back on, because otherwise I would have ended up like Fred. I do hope that he takes this as a lesson for next time. Then again, that's not something for me to worry about.